This is the E-Free Lethbridge podcast. Thanks for joining us on the E-Free Lethbridge podcast. It's the week of May 24th to 30th. And with us today, we've got the service pastor for the 9 a.m. service, the 11 a.m. service, the most community-minded person I know, Mark Dick.
Hello.
We have the Wonder Woman extraordinaire, Glenda Postman.
Wonder Woman.
Good morning.
And the service pastor for the 6 o'clock service, the Young at Heart, Luke Watson.
Good evening.
Morning.
And I am Levi.
Who knows when they're listening? Sorry.
Yeah, good evening. We are recording in the morning right now. I am your host, Levi. And before we kick things off, I just wanted to apologize for last week's episode. Some weird recording things happened. Hopefully, sometime in the future, we'll be able to get that recording to you guys. But until now, we're going to skip that episode and move into this episode coming out on May 27th. So let's kick it off with a fun morning question. Today's fun morning question is, what was the worst job you ever had? Worst job you've ever had?
For me, Levi, it was I was on a paving team. After first year university, I was making $8.50 an hour, and we were working probably 15-hour days. It was awesome. Like, I loved the money. I felt like that was making a lot of money, but long hours. And like, I remember you'd be in it'd be outside, so it was awesome just tamping the pavement. But sometimes with the asphalt, you'd be in like these covered, not a garage, but like where there'd be a roof over it. And you'd be just sweating like crazy. I remember I ran out of water in the morning. I started chugging coffee. So anyways, hard work. It was awful. Downtown Toronto sometimes. It was in the city, so it was humid. It was smoggy.
Gross job.
But I got jacked doing it because I was doing all the slave work. But man, hey Mark.
Well done. I'll go with, I worked on a hog farm for a while, and they were it was a farrow to finish, so they had little ones. They were born there, and so after they were born and weaned off the mother, then they would chase all the mothers out of the barn, and then we had to go in there with the hotsy and spray everything down. So you were in this little room and you were spraying, and there was crates and there was manure flying everywhere. That was the worst thing. You come out of there, to get that smell out of your skin took like a week, and then you had to do it again. So it was disgusting. That was my worst job ever.
Yeah, you said it was a hog farm.
I tell you, that was just gross. All of the things were gross about that. I can still taste it in my ears and in my mouth. It's gross.
Oh.
Man, Mark, I know about that smell because I worked in a slaughterhouse for pigs. The hogs. Oh man.
Oh.
Yeah, that was probably up there too, Glenda, with worst job ever.
Goodness.
Same thing over and over again on the line, factory line. Yeah.
I worked at the Spit sunflower seed factory.
Oh, nice.
I'm jealous.
Wow.
It was not a fun job. You would literally come home and you'd just be covered in salt from like head to toe. Like you could just like lick your lips. It was just like salt everywhere because it's like all the stuff is in there. And this was like when it was first started, it was on a farm outside of Bow Island in this Quonset building. And so it was very dusty and very salty, and I sealed bags like all day. So the bottom of the bag is like sealed and you'd run it through the sealer, but the sealer was this hot band that went around and there was like no cover on it. And one girl actually got her sleeve kind of got sucked into it and like it's just searing her arm and we couldn't get her out. I'm not kidding. It was crazy. It was back in the day.
Was that before safety standards?
I think so. It was crazy. This would have been like in the 80s. So
Oh.
Oh,
It
wow.
was just like a crazy job. And then when the train cars would come through, like with the sunflower seeds, we would go in and like clean them out sometimes, which meant that you went in. It was like rotting and hot, and we would go in and scrape down these these cars,
I
train
would have
cars.
never guessed you were the physical labor working hard in those sort of
Luke
places.
gets you and Luke get this. Yeah, we got jacked. It was great, and I get that. I would never get.
I never said I got jacked. I got
Mark didn't
covered
get
in
jacked.
hog crap. I didn't.
Mark
there's
got covered in
jack-
crap. Yeah.
You just, I want to like. Do you still sometimes feel like you can taste the like spit seasoning or on your like?
Oh, I didn't eat I didn't
lips?
eat sunflower seeds for years, like years and years and
Really?
years. Even like I had a son in baseball, and even that like didn't convince me. So no, I still am.
Ugh.
Yeah,
How
they
old were
cleaned
you,
it up.
Glenda?
So well,
Was
like I
that-
graduated in '87, and that was probably my job. I think that summer.
Crazy.
I started working when I was
Right,
14. I started working at 12 as a hired hand for a farm, and then at 14, I got a job for people with disabilities doing the bath shift. So I went in and bathed people
Oh,
from-
wow.
Oh, wow.
See,
4 to 7 p.m. and get them ready for bed. So I worked hard when I was a kid.
you're
Yeah.
an amazing
Yeah, they
person.
don't let you
No.
do that anymore.
Yeah, that's 14.
Wow.
I made
laugh-
$12 an hour. I was 14, which would have been like in
$12
the
an hour back then. That's
early
huge
80s.
money.
In the early
Yeah.
80s.
Yeah, $12 an hour
Oh.
is really good.
That's
Yeah.
huge money.
I laugh at youth now, like who are
50
complaining
bucks,
about
yeah.
how much they're making at like McDonald's or something. And like even for me, like I'm the youngest one in this group on the podcast. And when I started out, I got student wage in BC, which was $6.50
Yeah, I remember.
an hour
it
at
was- yeah.
Safeway. That's how much
That's a
I
huge
made.
jump, actually, from then.
Yeah. And so
Huge.
I remember I finally worked my way up in Safeway to making $8.75 an hour.
Yeah, see?
And
850
I
is
was
huge.
like, wow, that is amazing. Like I'm just
Yeah.
raking in the cash right now.
Yes, Levi. I can't
And
believe Glenda got 12
It's
bucks
crazy.
in the 80s.
Kids are making like
14 years
15 bucks
old.
an hour.
Yeah.
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 So
I worked that
anyways.
job until almost when I got married. I went back at Christmas and worked it. I just kept that job forever, and then every once in a while did a different summer job like the Spitz plant.
Yeah, for that kind of money, you didn't want to lose it.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
What's
I
yours,
don't-
Levi?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what to say to this.
Don't say church.
Yeah, church.
I was-
Worst job
I was-
ever.
The time I was a youth pastor.
One time.
Oh, wait a second. Yeah.
I think, I've got two different things. When I graduated high school, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And so I went to college. I got accepted into universities and decided not to do that. Went to college for a week, decided not to do that. So dropped out. And so I was just trying to
Wow.
I was still working at Safeway at the time. So I tried to get a second job just on top of that, working at Warehouse One. And the city that I lived in wasn't very big, so it didn't have a lot of stores or anything like that. So this was like, whatever, it's a clothing store. I like clothes. But pretty much all I did was basically help old women find jeans, all the time. And
I
like,
didn't know you were so skilled at this. I should bring you
And I
shopping. I'm an
worked
old
on
woman. I need
commission.
jeans.
I worked on commission. You get your pay, but you get plus commission. And so I just got really good at complimenting women on their jean choices. And
You should stop talking.
I know,
Okay,
I'm
go
so
on.
terrible.
Keep going, Levi.
Keep going. Keep going. This is getting good.
I'm
Oh
so
my
terrible.
goodness.
I'm such a terrible person. I was the only guy
You still
who
wanna
worked
buy
there.
jeans?
And I had I only worked there for 2 months, and because I ended up quitting traveling across Canada, but I had the best commissions. I was this young man commenting on all these ladies' jeans, and they were
Wow.
just raking them in. Sure, yeah, I'll buy it. So, anyways,
Levi, oh
the-
my
that's
goodness. I
good.
actually
That is
picture
amazing.
this. This is the frightening part. I can
You could
picture
see
this.
the ladies talking about that young man. Have you met that young
Did you
boy
know?
who sells jeans?
Go to Warehouse
Yes.
One.
Young boy.
It makes me feel so beautiful.
Be careful. He'll talk you into an extra pair every time.
Oh man.
complimenting old ladies on their jeans. Like, I can't.
You know, he really liked the rhinestones on the bum of this one.
Yeah, that's
Very
true.
good. I decided to go for the
Okay.
rhinestones.
I think like so
Oh,
to change
man.
subjects, my second one was when I worked at camp. My parents were Bible camp directors when I worked at this camp in Saskatchewan, and they would give me the crappier jobs, I think. And so one time I had to clean out a deep freeze that
Mhm.
was moldy. So it was frozen
Oh.
mold.
Oh,
And I had to chip
how is
it
that
out.
possible?
I know. I don't. Yeah, it was very gross. And I think what had happened was it had thawed in the
Mhm.
concession,
Oh,
and then
Oh,
got moldy.
refroze,
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
bad.
and it was all moldy. And I had to chip it out, and there was mold. Oh, it was so gross. And
That's
so
yeah.
I
That's
think
hard.
like when I look at all the worst jobs, I think that's the worst task I've ever done. Like I was gagging. Oh man, it was really bad.
Man,
So-
Levi, that should be another lighter. That's a good question. I have a story about that too. What's the worst
Oh.
task you've done?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's some bad tasks. Yeah.
Oh, we got to talk about that next
Another
week.
question.
Next week,
Easier.
worst task.
Oh,
Yeah, see, we're really like getting the listeners to keep following us. Next
Yes,
week, we're going to be
exactly.
talking about the worst task we've ever done. Now,
ever done.
now I have to think of a new worst task.
You do.
That's true, Levi.
Thanks. Me too.
That's true.
Maybe
shared
don't
my
mention
worst
women's
one.
jeans anymore.
Yes,
Stay
I
away
won't.
from that.
I'll stay away.
Stay
I'll
away
stay
from the
away from that.
rhinestones.
All right, it's time to get to the
Oh,
message.
That was good.
All right, this week we kicked off our series called Courage Under Fire. It's a series on the book of Daniel. And before we get too far into things, I would just want to promote a couple of different opportunities that you have with the series. We had these journals that had been given out. They are completely free. You can still order one for pickup if you're in Lethbridge or the surrounding area, or you can just actually get it online. There's a downloadable version. So they're devotional journals. They're also like a journal that you can write about what you're thinking, what God's speaking to you on Sundays. With that, we have these read and response groups. So you can read along with the reading plan, and then join one of these groups, and you can talk about what you're getting out of it. And then also really cool, we have small groups specifically just for this series that are going over these same questions that we're going over in the podcast. So it's just another way to connect. But I think it's kind of cool. Everything is going together. I know a lot of people who listen to the podcast, they tell me that it feels like they're part of the conversation. Well, now they actually can be part of the conversation. So that's really cool. And you can join another group, or you can even create your own group, like bring your friends into it and just do the questions with them. So that's pretty exciting. So just a
Do
few
we count? Do we
opportunities.
count as a small group?
I feel like we count as a small group.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good.
I think of this as my small group, so it's pretty good.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks.
So this week, Pastor Jeff kicked off the series in Daniel chapter 1, discussing how Daniel ends up refusing to eat the food that is given to him by the king
Mhm.
so that it won't defile him, yet the Lord provides nourishment for him. What do you think we can learn from this situation Daniel was in? Is it applicable to our lives right now?
It's kind of interesting because like he didn't protest other things like
Right.
being given a different name, that these were like the upper who's who, because they were all people from nobility, right? Or the royal family in
Right.
some way.
Yeah.
So and then they were given like all these, they were exiled, and everything was destroyed of theirs, their country, their temple, and brought into this new place. And it's interesting that the king had this draw to draw them in, and food was the thing.
Yeah.
Strange, right?
Agree,
That
Glenda.
yeah, me too. There was seemingly like even the name changing the names for me
Yeah.
when I didn't realize the meanings of their original names, and then to like completely change. For me, that was significant. Naming your own children, thinking about my name, and then you think that the king changed their godly names. They're essentially this God-given, God-meaning names to something. And then the food was the thing, because they wouldn't have been given the not good food, right? Like the food that they would
The
have eaten
king's
would have been
table,
good.
the king's
Yeah, the king's
food.
even
drink,
if it was dedicated to gods or whatever it happened to be, it would have been good food. So it's funny that, or it's interesting to me that they could see the food, didn't take that food, and ate vegetables or whatever their other thing. My kids aren't sure that you could live just on vegetables. They actually asked us, they're like, are you sure you could live just on vegetables? But anyways, they are meat eaters. But I was surprised too that that was the line in the sand, or whatever, because I would have guessed that changing the name would have been even more significant in my mind. But
see,
yeah.
I think at first I was thinking that way too. I'm like, names meant a lot back then. To change a name, like that's pretty crazy. But I think so. With food, that's the king trying to provide for them, and so Daniel was really going, actually, you're not going to provide for me in this way.
That's a good point.
Whereas you can't refuse a name change, really. Like you could say, well, I'm not taking that name, but really that person can call you that name ongoing. But you can refuse food. Like, what are you going to do? Shove it down my throat? No. Like,
Yeah, he was asking them to consume something. So it wasn't just something that was pushed like on the outside of them, but this was like to consume it. So to take it in, I think is different. And the idea was that the food was like, Jeff talked about, the food was sacrificed to idols. So that was a lot of the problem with the food. Because I was wondering, is it a wisdom thing? Like they knew you needed vegetables and fruit? Or was it this opposition to what the food was?
I think that was I think this idea of being in exile, like living away from home, and then chapter 1 kind of just paints this picture of what it looks like, a sense. And I'm like, man, we're living in the same spot. Like we're not in Christian Canada, right? We're in exile. We're not in the kingdom of God right now. But I think, and then the significance of just picking your battles. Like I even thought too, like, okay, how many of us would get up in arms when the school starts teaching evolution or takes prayer out of schools and stuff like that, right? Oh, wait, we already did get up in arms about this stuff. But this was something that Daniel and his friends were doing. Like they were being educated and immersed into the Babylonian culture, right? And that wasn't, I'm not saying right or wrong, if you want to pick the battle with evolution and prayer in schools, whatever, maybe that's something that God's put on your heart. But that's not the battle he chose to pick. Right, it was the food thing. I just think it's interesting because we are in similar spaces as these Daniel and his friends here, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think this
Amen,
battle?
Levi.
Yeah. What?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were gonna go off on the schooling or something like that.
I was going to, and then I held back a little bit.
You did.
Decided not to go off on it. All I was gonna say is, I think Daniel's, like, when we go off on schools about these issues. Well, I was gonna say minor issues, but I'm just gonna call them issues. I think we do it in a different way than Daniel did it. Like Daniel, he is refusing, but in a very godly way. Whereas,
see, this is the thing. He doesn't go in demanding. He doesn't go in and saying, he says, let's try this. Like, let's try this. If it doesn't work, then that's okay. But let's just try this. And so he appeals to the king. He's not revolting. He's not refusing. Even in the position they're in, like they're not out there trying to convert everybody into their way. They're just living how they feel God has called them to live.
Amen, Greta. That's so crucial right there. I think that we're not called to be the moral police of the culture. We're called to live in the culture by how God has called us to live, right? And I think we confuse that so easily when we live in exile, right?
I think Daniel, not only did he appeal to the king, but he actually did it in relationship to the chief officer. Like
With
he
submission,
already
yeah.
had affection from the chief officer. That means that he was in relationship. He built
That's
that
good.
relationship, and he didn't go to that chief officer demanding. He went in relationship with, this is what I'm thinking, kind of.
Asking permission,
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Mm.
seeking the, like, he isn't fighting against the kingdom. He's actually working with the king, which apparently he has done, which it earns him this place. Like, I mean, he was so wise and knowledge. He's learning their language. It's just, yeah.
Man.
We think that living as exiles means, I think at times being the loudest voice and the ones to say, we will never, like, we will not. But this doesn't feel like the tone that's happening there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this is a battle for our young people?
Yeah, Jeff talked about that lots too in the sermon, that this is like this capturing of youth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what was it? Can we just review that a little bit? I kind of missed Jeff's main drive there with that point.
Yeah.
Well, I think he compared
go
it.
ahead,
He
Mark.
also just used the fact that Daniel and his friends were young, right? And they sort of set the course.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
set their course different by how they drew the line in the sand, or how they made choices that were not imposed by the government. How they chose different things. How the model in terms of how they went about their following God. So I think that's where he went with the young people piece, just knowing and understanding and using Daniel and his friends as young people making decisions that were.
He was saying that the king's resolve was, like, his line was, the king's resolve was the struggle for control and allegiance of the young people. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted to get them while they were young, so that they would serve him
for the rest of their life. Yeah, that was, got it. So then, Levi,
that's interesting, because if you want to go in and change culture, like, people, that's why people go in, like, even countries that have done this and tried to change culture or capture, they have gone into thinking places, so universities, schools, and tried to shift things in there. So I do think that has some limits with our culture as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think like when there's a shift in our young people, that's when culture does move.
Right.
But specifically in Canada, I love our country, but at the same time, there's everything goes in our country. Everything is right. And so, like, I think there is a tension for our young people to stand up actually for what they believe in, and go against the grain of everything is okay, everything is right.
Right.
And so I think there is tension there. I think the battle is definitely there for our young people. I love Tim's story. And Tim, like, knowing Tim, he is a person who doesn't go with the grain. He will stand up for what he actually believes, and not in a confrontational way, but just in this is who I am. This is who God's made me to be. This is what I believe.
But even he talked about the tension of truth and love in that. Like, he figured out it also needed to be loving.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I'm reminded of that call to test everything in 1 Thessalonians, right? Do not quench the spirit, but test everything. That we need to develop critical thinking. Just because we saw a video on YouTube doesn't mean that is the 100% truth, right? And I think now our young people are getting bombarded with information and things that appear to be, this is gospel truth, and we need to test everything. And I mean, even I look at the university, and maybe I'm going on my own little soapbox here, Levi, so prevent me, but there's a hidden bias in our universities right now where the people that are teaching are coming from kind of an elite place. They've got tons of education that most normal Canadians don't have. They are making good money. And I think if they left their academic offices, they would see that people do think a little bit differently and have different worldviews outside of that culture. And we all have these hidden biases that go unchecked and we don't recognize. So Man, I could talk about that for a long time, but I just think it's important for us to test everything and develop critical thinking skills, because these are the people that are raising up our young people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Definitely. What
Do
did
you
you
think
guys?
I would?
Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I would say part of that probably already starts earlier than
But then university, yeah.
University. I would say that even like, developing critical thinking in our younger even than that. So if you go with Daniel and his friends were 13, 14 years old, there's even like earlier in the children's development where you want to try to help them understand some critical thinking. Not maybe there's some like right and wrong pieces, but maybe there's also just some like asking good questions and like being able to have good discussions and being able to at some level
That's good, Mark.
at some level understand other people's opinions, even to like
Right.
like figure out what other people's opinions look like, and that not everybody is going to think exactly the same as you, and I think, and to discern where and how they can I think the truth in love, right? How do you accept what people are saying in love, understanding that it's not maybe the same as what you believe. So I think that some of that critical thinking comes with trying to help our even younger than university age kids, and whether they go to university or Bible school or whatever their experience is, college, trade school, whatever, that even younger, they're already learning some critical thinking. So when they get to these places, they can be okay with saying, I don't know about that, or
Right.
actually having a discussion with somebody to say, hey, this is what they were talking about in wherever I went. Is this legit? So I think it starts earlier even than the university or the college. Otherwise, by then you almost have kids that all they do is open their mouth and get fed the stuff that is
Right. That's really good, Mark. What would be some of the things that you talk about with your kids? Because I would say you and Bonnie are good at that, Mark, as parents.
Well, you have to, I think, instead of fearing and like
Nice.
not engaging with like the changes in our culture or the things in our culture that are different than even what Bonnie and I would have grown up with, but even not always biblical. The things in our culture, the things that the kids experience, the things that they participate in, they see happening, or even are discussed in their classes. We can't fear those discussions. We can't. You can't, as parents, live in fear that your kids might be learning something that isn't exactly what you taught your kids. But say, hey, like, what did you learn? Like, what do you, so one of the examples is this sex ed, we called it, or theme 5 or whatever they call it today. Like we choose to put our kids in it. That's what
they call it, yeah, for years.
Yeah, we choose to put our kids in there. But from those, or that they participate with their classmates in it in the school. I know that not every family does that, but we then, though, are intentional about the conversations around it. So is there like, are they going to learn some things that maybe we wouldn't teach them quite at that age? Maybe, but if they're teaching them that in school, my kids don't often come home and say, hey, I learned something new in this theme 5. It's, hey, some kids were talking about this and this is what they said, and it's not exactly the same. There's like conversations that we have had coming out of it that we just, as opposed to being fearful, for us, our response being fearful, we choose just to maybe engage it in a different way at home. So I don't know, there's different angles.
When we look at ourselves as victims of culture, I think that's where we kind of get derailed in this, because we think, oh, culture is like victimizing us or putting us in this place, and it isn't that. We actually get to be people who set our own culture. Like what you're talking about is the culture in your home that you're setting, which is you can ask anything. and come to your
Yeah.
parents because we can be trusted. So you actually get to set your own culture in your home and your family
Yeah.
and really your friend and community. There's lots of ways that you can set your own culture, because our call isn't just the bare minimum in these things. It's so much bigger than that. It isn't just to be tolerant of things or know how to say things nicely. It's love. The call is to
Yeah.
love. It's greater
That's a
than
good
even
point.
the call that the world is calling us to. It's even greater. It's even more so. It's more tolerant. It's totally unoffendable. That's the
Yeah.
call that we have. It's love. It's
Hmm.
not keeping records of wrongs. It's like, so the calls on those things are better, but I don't think we have to be victimed at this point in our culture by our culture. We get to set
Mhm.
it, and we get to set it higher.
And to also understand,
Good
I don't
point,
have
Glenda.
this is we don't have the like rule book or how to do this. Our kids are still younger. You know, there's some like learning that we do along the way, but I like that we don't we wouldn't take a victim mindset. This is actually we're in like a place we're a place in it that we can steer and change some of even our kids' perspective into the future. Hopefully. You know.
Maybe not a victim mindset, but do you feel like sometimes we protect our reputation? Like, do we seek to protect our reputation instead? Like, it's not really being like a victim of culture, but we're still a little bit of afraid of it.
Hmm.
What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think when we engage with culture, we understand that there are people who have had negative experiences.
Right.
And I think that's maybe getting less and less, where people don't have any experience, and so we don't need to assume negativity. But we did
Like, you mean
come from
with church or faith?
yeah, with church or
Yeah,
faith. Yeah. So
yeah.
I wonder if we try to be sensitive to that. I don't know if that's bad. I don't know if it's bad to be concerned about that. We probably shouldn't be afraid of it either. Like when we really understand, if you have something that you think is such great news, it's hard not, and you want people to know that, you want to share it. So I'm not sure we should be ashamed, but I think there is a sensitivity in it. I don't know, is that good or bad?
Yeah, I hear you going down that.
I mean, I don't know if it's good or bad. Daniel earned the respect of the king
So he had
and
a good
the
reputation.
king advisor, so he had a good reputation. I
He
don't know
wasn't
if it,
concerned about his reputation. He was just
No,
doing,
that's the thing.
he was
Yeah,
just
Yeah.
doing what was obedience. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe we are too concerned. Maybe I wonder too, do I make decisions because I don't want people to think a certain way about me? And really, first of all, who cares? And second of all, they're probably not even thinking that. We fill in the blanks negatively all the time. So I don't know.
Yeah, we
it's
fill in the
man.
blank, not maybe just with assumptions, period, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would almost say that too often I think we maybe side with the worry too much about a reputation of like, well, I'm a pastor in the church, or I'm a Christian. I mean, the reality is that we are still sinners and we make mistakes, and people are going to judge those mistakes. You know, I've screwed up tons in my life and have not given Jesus a good name and not given the church a good name. So on that for sure. But one of the ways, I just thought about this story. I remember playing intramural hockey when I came out here with some of these university guys. I think I was probably 29, 30 years old, playing with all these 18-year-olds. None of them were Christians, but I saw this as an opportunity to start having meaningful conversations. And where do you think 18-year-olds hang out? In the bar, having beers after the game. And I remember being there at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning with these guys. I was single at the time. And you know what was driving me, Glenda? Was it love for these guys, or was I thinking too much about, what if a church person sees me in here and all of a sudden I'm going to be tattletaled on or whatever? And I got to tell you, too often I think I let that reputation of, people are going to see this and might say stuff. And I'm like, man, Jesus didn't seem to care about that. The church people, the Pharisees, criticized him for hanging out with sinners. And I think that's the kind of boldness that I need to have and stop worrying about reputation or putting on a good face or doing the checklist stuff, because I think that's getting in the way sometimes.
Well, and that reputation can swing both ways. Are you just trying to prove a point to them that Christians
Right.
aren't
Yes.
all this way? So
Right.
we just have to
Oh,
find a way to
totally.
be obedient in this. Like, what are you calling us to, God? And then to live that out without fear, I think.
Yeah, and staying up till 3 a.m. is that really wise? Probably not. I mean, it wasn't all the time, but
And maybe it is. Maybe those are significant like we don't know, but only really you get to
yeah.
ask God that. Yeah.
And
You
I
look,
did
I'll
love,
tell
I
you, you
love
look
those
pretty
guys.
haggard. You look pretty haggard in those days. Stayed up too late, didn't sleep enough.
Sounds like the
Come to
perfect
the
recipe.
office.
Perfect recipe for burnout.
Yeah,
Amen.
Staying up till 3 a.m.
that was brutal. My buddy Jared and I, I shouldn't be dropping names, but yeah, him and I.
Man, I still think it's a great weekend when you've been up till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Really?
I don't know if
Yeah,
I
like
could.
1,
I
2
can't
a.m.
do
this
it anymore,
weekend.
Glenda.
Oh
Really?
man. Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. Side note: last night, I have actually a picture of this. Last night at 4 a.m., my son started crying randomly. So then, and then he stopped, and it was silent. And I thought, okay, that's weird. Like it was just like a little bit of cry, and so I'm like, okay, he's probably gone back to sleep. I look at the monitor, video monitor. He's literally just standing in his crib. Like,
When are they coming? I called them.
it's like, no, I think he's sleeping. Like,
Really?
standing, sleepwalking. I don't know. And then he kind of said a couple other things, laid back down. By 4:30, he was sleeping. It was like the weirdest thing ever. So creepy.
He's just having a little crib party.
Yeah, crib party.
Oh, that's good.
I've never seen that before. Like, yeah, he might cry, but he's always lying down. Okay, so moving on a little bit. Jeff said, God says, take a stand for me and I will bless you. And yet this is not what always happens.
The book
For
of
example, Job, yeah. How do we make sense of this?
Ecclesiastes, lots of passages would.
I'm always quick to say, yes, when we take a stand for God, that is a place where he meets with us. I think that is a place where he will bless you, but the blessing doesn't always look the same. That's how I always understand it. Do you guys have other ways to understand this?
Yeah, like even you take the Job story, but like, I mean, God did bless him at the end though, right? The blessing did come.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do have a promise of eternal life, right? So that we don't earn that through our good work. Yeah, yeah.
Talking yourself
Sorry,
into this and out of it.
And out and back out.
And here you are. We still don't know where you're at. But anyway.
That's it. And back out.
I think, like, I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking, so what is blessing? Like, what are we talking about? Because I think we
That's a good
picture
question.
that we're going to have, things are going to work out well or something. We have this idea. And then I was reading this thing, it was by C.S. Lewis. It was talking about obedience and is saying that blessing really is receiving God's favor regardless of the circumstances. So it kind of takes this idea of circumstantial out of it, because we can read into this health and wealth kind of philosophy. Like when I do these things, God is going to bless me by making sure what I want is accomplished, or what I want is what he wants, or I don't know, like we find a way to make this into what we want it to be. But really that's not what the promise is. When we were told to be obedient, if you love me, you'll keep my commands, John 15, something like that. So we are told like we have to obey, and like this will go well with you and for you. Mm-hmm. But that obedience, like in Job, he lost everything. He stood in front of God and said, why are you standing there looking at me and not doing anything? This is what he asked God. So
what a great question.
I know, what a great question. So I think we have to leave space for this too, because lots of people are standing and looking at God saying, look, this is what is happening to my kid, and why are you not doing anything? This is what's happening with my illness, and why are you not doing anything? So
right, that's good. Yeah. I've done all the right things. Mm-hmm. Where are you? What are you doing?
which
Yeah.
is exactly what Job asked. And the
Yeah.
answers that his friends gave him are not bad answers. I am sure I have given those answers to people. I apologize if I've given those answers to you. But his answers, they are theologically fine. We shouldn't have huge issues with them. Have you sinned? Have you, like, this is what they're asking him. But the problem with it and why God says they're not good is it because it is not what Job needed to hear from God. What Job was asking of God was still connecting with him and saying, where are you? And what I want is to walk with you. So they were just bad. They were wrongly timed, which meant they were wrong, even though they were kind of true.
You could say the right thing, but at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
They got, like those friends, because they were condemned, were they not? The friends,
Yeah.
not condemned, but
Yeah.
God kind of rebuked
Yes.
them. Yeah,
Yes.
even though they had the right theological answer.
Yeah.
God said, no, this was not correct.
So Job would tell us, and Ecclesiastes even takes this whole thing one step further, and it's saying, really, it's all meaningless. Like what the author of Ecclesiastes is saying is, God's going to do whatever he wants. Doesn't matter if you're good or bad. If you listen, don't listen. He's going to go off and do his own way, however he wants. Like it's a pessimistic wisdom view,
Right.
but it's also in the
And
scripture.
yet, right. And yet we have to hold that intention with the, like there is a road that leads to life. Right. And yeah.
So is that, would you say that would be the tension sort of? We probably lean to the tension that leads to life. We know we lean there, the good news that we sort of live for some eternal glory, some eternal, we even like walk through the, I don't even want to, not even like Job situations, but like the things to, we actually know the end of the story, whether God is going to do, whether the things are going to happen. So is the obedience necessary? When you use John, you talked about John, and that loving God is obeying.
Yeah. It's John 14,
I don't like there's
not 15.
I think, but the obedience or the tension in the we obey and love God, but
right.
And through the whatever situations, through the things that we experience, through the situations of life, we still know that in the end, we actually know the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't,
Because God's favor, blessing is God's favor regardless of circumstance.
God's favor.
And
that's
also,
what blessing means. Yeah.
and also this like coming promise. But I think we think like the question I would ask is then can we have expectation of now? Can we have expectation that when I obey, things will go well with me?
Well, I think that is in Daniel's case, there was it showed up that way. And I would say even probably we could, if you reflect on your own life, there's even times of the choice of integrity or choice of obedience when we make it, that there is blessing, that you could actually, even in the list of things that you would say, well, I did all these things, or the list of people, because I would say the same, even in their obedience and their loving God, that it doesn't always turn out in blessing. But I think that we also, I think even in the here and now, probably could say, you know what, when the obedience, or when I lived the life that was in tune with God, loving God, there was blessing. The blessing that he showed up, his presence, all of the names of God that we just talked about were actually realities in my life. I think even away from maybe a health and wealth and prosperity gospel, I think there's even just a presence gospel that would be an interesting sort of ripple blessing effect of this. I don't know.
I wonder if the answer is yes and yes. Like, yes, we should expect blessing of obedience to come and yes, we should express problems. So I've been reading this book about Job, and Job is basically saying, I'm going to take you to court, God. Like, and so he uses all these legal metaphors when he's talking about it, saying, listen, I'm going to go on trial. He talks about being arbiter and witness, and he
Mhm.
uses all these he uses all these legal terms to
Yeah.
say, I'm going to take you to court because what's happening is not fair, it's not just, it's not right.
Right.
And so it's talking about this, it's retribution, right? This idea of retribution. And so in this book, it talks about the book of Job does not disown all forms of retribution. It doesn't say, talk about this, but it disowns simplistic, mathematically precise, and instant applications of this.
Mhm.
So we can't boil it down to this simplistic measure. I will obey, I will be blessed in this one way.
Right.
Some of that might wait. It's not instant. It's not always simple and mathematically precise. But we are
Or
promised.
recognizable right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. System. Yeah. I even just the gospel, I think, is if you've acknowledged and received Jesus, then you have the Lord's blessing on your life, period.
Mm.
And that's not going to look like maybe the way you expected. That doesn't mean your dreams are going to come true and all that stuff. It probably will look the opposite, but blessing means the Lord's favor, and that
Yeah.
rests upon you if you've acknowledged Christ, you know?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks, friends. Thanks, friends, for
I
sharing.
shouldn't have had that.
Thanks for sharing. It's time to move to On the Lighter Side.
On the lighter side.
So today's On the Lighter Side. How have you guys been engaging during this time and staying connected? Is there such a thing as too much?
Yeah.
I'm setting you guys up for this one because I feel like I know the answer. I think yes, it is. There's a thing is too much.
I would say
Too
early on I engaged, and even we as a family probably engaged in more like Zoom calls and Zoom meetings and watching all the, for me personally, watching even, I work at the church and I still would watch all the things, whatever that was produced. The kids are on some kind of screen, engaging in school, that kind of stuff. Bonnie works on some sort of calls, same thing all the time. So I would say yes, it's too much. Our family actually wants to be outside, ride bikes, do that kind of stuff. Still, the boys have a propensity to Xbox, but we still like to
Xbox.
stop it
Different
with some
screen.
of the
Doesn't count. It's
interaction.
games.
Yeah, interaction like this online in terms of Zoom or whatever is getting to be exhausting. I hear that from people all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, it's too much. There's a smorgasbord of things out there. The idea is you don't have to pick them all. Just pick what you want. So that's what I'd say. Especially like you can't over communicate. So the church is really like, as far as the church goes, we really want to be communicating in lots and lots of ways. And so you
sure.
pick what's a good way to hear that.
Mm-hmm. It's better to over communicate than under communicate.
Amen.
Speaking from my experience with my lovely wife, I'm an under communicator. So
Yes, you are.
but yeah, I think it could be too much. That's one thing I've realized in these days too, is just that like I think my screen time's gone up like crazy, and it does have an effect on your
They say like
health and well-being.
700% overall as a nation. 700.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah, like I moved into the director of communication spot, and so obviously I'm a
Congrats,
little bit
Levi.
biased. I think it's good that there's lots of content. It's a smorgasbord. I don't even know how to say that word, but it's a buffet. So you choose the
Buffet.
thing that works for yourself and connects you the best. And the thing we have to realize is we had a whole list of ministries that were going on before COVID. And once COVID hit, we kept most of those going, but we wanted to start offering some new ways to engage that might be perfect for this time, that we might
Mhm.
continue going. So that almost doubled up on things. So now
Right.
we really have to pick and choose. What are the areas that connect
That's a good
me
point.
to this, to God, to the church, to other people? And we have to retrain ourselves, retrain the way that you do online
And
things.
programs and these tools are not a way for us to just put programs and tools out there. They're a way for people to connect people to God and others. And so find the best way for that.
So one hand, I'm promoting all these things with the new Daniel series. On the other hand, I'm saying use what is best for you to connect. No one's offended when people are like, oh, actually the journal, like I'll do an e-version, or I actually have got my own journal, devotional plan. That's wonderful. Use the tool that's connecting you to God. That's what we are actually hoping for.
Yes, amen.
Well, I think that concludes our episode for today. Thank you for joining us. Until next week, signing off.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
See you, everybody.